Um, when I was asked to make a contribution to the Storia series, Luca suggested that I tell my own personal history of art through the work that I was looking at the time, when I was, the work that I was looking at which formed what I do in my work. And I tried to do exactly that, although I have to say that autobiography doesn't come naturally to me. So I tend to lapse into ideas, as I might do periodically. But I do hope that even though I've tried to do what Luca suggested and tell a story of how my work came about through the influences of other artists. Anyway, to start, the first story relates to this piece by the British artist John Latham, which must have been hanging in the Duveen galleries at the Tate, because my first recollection of it was passing it on the way to the pre-war and 19th century galleries at the Tate, where I spent a part of every Saturday. At the age of 14, our family moved to London from the Midlands. And in the Midlands, there was pretty well no possibility of encountering live art of any kind. So my knowledge of art history up to that point had been purely from reproductions in books. So I really was making the most of it when we arrived in London. And I spent a good portion of every Saturday down at the Tate Gallery. And I was quite a conservative. Well, maybe I'm still a conservative, but I certainly wasn't interested in contemporary art at all. In fact, I marched past, blinkered past the contemporary art section. I ignored even such radicals as Matisse, whose escargot was in the foyer. Also, I ignored Rothko, Klein, and Latham. And in fact, all I can remember of this entrance, just to clarify, I'd spend that part of every Saturday dwelling on certain artists that I admired. Freud, Bacon, a variety of German expressionists, and Stanley Spencer, a number of British romantic artists were what I was really interested in. But one day, I was walking past the John Latham collage, which was very familiar to me. It was part of the geography of making my way to the art that really interested me. And for a long time, it had been red. And suddenly, inexplicably, it turned blue. And I thought I was going insane or hallucinating. I wasn't sure quite what was going on. So I went to the middle-aged receptionist at the front desk at the Tate. And she was within viewing distance of this piece. And I said, but it's changed. Last week I was here, it was red. This week it's blue. She looked at me as though I was completely mad. But I thought, well, sitting so close to it, you would think you would have noticed the change in colour, but apparently not. Anyway, she phoned upstairs. I said, no, please don't, please don't. I wanted to disappear as quickly as possible. It was just a casual encounter, but it was too late. She was already on the phone to the senior curator, who I later discovered was a man called Ronald Alley, who was a giant of a man, 6'5" or something. And it seemed like ages before anything happened. And I started to sort of try and move away, but was immediately ordered back to stand to attention next to the receptionist. Eventually, this giant of a man appeared out of the tiny little invisible door in the wall. And I remember his smile seemed to arrive about 5 minutes before he did across the room. And he was beaming by the time he arrived at me. And then he took me to this piece. And he started struggling with it. And he pulled out 2 wires like this, turned a page of the book, and as you can see, I've got the exact example of the converse. It was red, but it all turned blue. And he showed me how, with one book, you could change the colour from red to blue. The idea being that the whole of it had been changed from red to blue. And he told me that John Latham used to come in from time to time and do this, just completely change it. Anyway, I asked him if you could do that. kind of thing. And he responded with a huge smile, saying, "Yes, you can, young man." As I started to collect images, I found myself gravitating to border zones of image culture, out-of-the-way image microcosms, and especially obsolete imagery. This became the material of my work, and I use the word material specifically here because it's the sense of materiality of the image that seems to draw me to these neglected spaces within the culture of images. The spaces of forgotten archives, of discarded images, seem always like fissures within the seamlessness of the spectacle. As Baudrillard put it, vestiges of the real in the ever-renewing world of images, like derelict buildings that punctuate the seamless continuum of urban space. Repetition seems to draw the image into a strange intermediary space, neither the flatness and materiality of the image, nor the perspectival space of the photographic illusion, but somewhere in between, a space where the image, alienated from its usual perspectival legibility, reveals its hidden formal relations. This suspension of meaning seems to inaugurate, for me, image fascination. And this is actually my favorite work in the new monograph on Reuer's work. The aerial view seems to bring out a kind of textural quality, making the repetition tactile, almost like weaving. The next important image encounter comes from around the end of the 1970s now, and involves the work of the American artist Jack Goldstein, who by then I'd already got to know in England, and in fact he was my guide and introduction to New York. But when I arrived in New York finally, and saw the MGM Film Loop, it was a real surprise. Nothing had prepared me for that. As with Reuer's collages, Goldstein's fascination with the multiplicity of available images uses repetition as a process of transformation. In Goldstein's work, one is aware of the appropriation of the media image as a kind of pullback, as an arrest of the ordinary flow. The loop, it's a film loop, and I'll show it in a minute. It returns upon itself, and it seems to open up another space of the image. I felt it was close to Reuer's. I connected the two. And legibility is reversed into image somehow. Rather than reading it, it's transformed into image. Instead of being aligned with flow and the fullness of life, the loop seems to return us to the space of interruption. For me, the space of death. Cinema, looped into cyclical time, seemed to render visible what was invisible within cinema. The fleeting image of unconscious reception becomes amenable to conscious, reflective vision. It keeps returning. It never goes away. When I first encountered MGM, the MGM Lion, I knew I'd experienced something like this before. And it was in one of Joseph Cornell's films entitled Rose Hobart. There's 2 consecutive frames from it, where repetition creates a similarly uneasy or uncanny space. More than any other artist, Cornell has been my personal guide for years. The visit to his Whitechapel show in 1981 came at a decisive moment for me. I faced a question that a lot of art school graduates face after they've been out of college for about a decade, of whether to pursue my vocation as an artist, as a career, or, as I thought, to protect my art by pursuing a career as a teacher. Well, circumstances had pretty well taken any choice out of the matter anyway, but without being over-dramatic, Cornell certainly, as an example, came to me at the right time and helped me to adjust to pursuing my collage practice in private. For me, at the time, Cornell represented the ideal that Blanchot talks about, of the artist as an exile from life in the world of images. An ideal, of course, incidentally, that in the early 80s was completely at odds with the general professionalism of art practice, as well as the whole ideology of modernist and postmodernist art, which is all about being public. Collage for Cornell is a confrontation with the irreconcilable, created out of the most earnest and innocent desires for reconciliation of difference. What's at stake for Cornell is the relationship between the image and the dream. Cornell helped begin a movement backwards in my image fascinations, as well as in the works I turned to for inspiration. He taught me the importance of dwelling in and on an image. It would be an exaggeration to say that my aesthetic voyage thereafter, I mean from the 1980s onwards, has been a reverse one, a progressive immersion in the art of the past. But it is certainly true that from the 80s onwards, I felt the need to abandon the imperative of being contemporary for the sake of my own freedom in my work. What I needed was what Blanchot described as the essential solitude of the work. And this, in the work of the collagist, amounts to the idea of the seclusion of the found image, through which the image achieves a state of singularity and repose. Very finally, Giorgio de Chirico's plea for solitude in his memoirs really connected with me at that time. He describes a low-ceilinged room far away from the art world political infighting in Paris. His memoirs, like the career they follow, illustrate the crushing power of the modernist orthodoxy of his day. His best work had always been produced in a situation of retreat. The neglect to which he was subject is both scandalous and astonishing. After his encounters with the politics of the art world, the only label he would ever allow for his paintings was metaphysical. And though it's a rather overgrand term in terms of aspirations, I think it's a good label for the works I've been describing today. Each of these works has represented a jolt of consciousness involving an arrest that's initiated fundamental changes in my outlook and in my work. So I would claim that all these works, I would claim of all these works that they challenge and subvert our everyday reality through the image. And this is kind of a metaphysics of the image. That's it, thank you.